All right. So Louise is the co-founder of Pollinator Pathway and the president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association and a friend of Earthplace. And we're super excited to have her here with us today. She's going to be talking about the payoffs of a pesticide-free yard. And we're super excited to have her. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith. And thank you, Earthplace, for having me and for giving time to this topic, which I'm totally passionate about. So um, I'm happy to be speaking on the part of both the Pollinator Pathway and the Norwalk River Watershed Association, which I also am on the board of. And both of those organizations work to protect wildlife habitat and clean water. And this talk is going to really be about how we can all be part of that, how we can, what we do in our yard affects both of those things. So I wanted to start with some of the bad news, unfortunately. This talk, when you say you're talking about pesticides, it's a pretty bleak topic, but we're going to also talk about, good things that you can do in your yard. But the pollinator pathway got started because of some of these unfortunate bleak numbers that most of you probably are familiar with. The monarch population's down 90% in the last 20 years. The North American bumblebees, some of them in decline as much as 96%. We have the rusty patch bumblebee that many of you might have heard of that used to be lots of them in Connecticut, and now they are on the endangered species list. Colony collapse of the European honeybee has gotten a lot of attention, but when all of this really started to take shape was in 2017, when this German study came out that was just a meticulous study that had looked at populations of flying insects since 1989. And they saw that there had been a 76% decline since that time. And that's when the New York Times did the insect apocalypse cover. And that is also when the pollinator pathway got started. It's really when many of us clued in. People like Victor were already noticing these changes. But for the rest of us, that was really the time. And then we started looking at what are the threats to pollinators? What's making this happen? And some of them loss and fragmentation of habitat, so not having the native plants that they've evolved that they've evolved alongside, that provide them with food and shelter. And the reason that they don't have those plants the way they need is invasive plants, just lack of plants, these big lawns like in this picture that really don't offer a diversity of plant life. And then fragmentation, that means like this picture on the left, when we are chopping up our landscape the way we tend to do. And then it's difficult for wildlife pollinators to move from space to space. And then there's climate change, which is putting huge pressures on pollinator populations. Light pollution, particularly harmful to moths and like lightning bugs. And then pesticides and lawn chemicals, which I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight. But it's not just the pollinators that we are seeing in decline. We are also seeing big declines in birds. Lots of people have heard this terrifying number that we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And there's a connection here. There's a connection between the insects and the birds. And I stole this slide from Hardy Kern from American Bird Conservancy, but he has this number, which I didn't know, that it is 96% of terrestrial birds eat insects. So when we are having these steep declines in insects, we're also seeing steep declines in birds. And then this chart shows something really interesting, the correlation, the decline in insect-eating birds is what you see on the left. And then the insects, the small percentage of birds that don't eat insects have actually had a little bit of an increase in population. So that's just an interesting. And then lots of people know this, Doug Ptolemy's work on how just watching a suburban chickadee nest and how many caterpillars the parents needed to feed one clutch of chickadees. And I don't know if you guys know the answer, if anybody knows the answer, but it is 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. So the Lepidoptera, the moth and butterfly species are really important to birds because they need those caterpillars. So what can we do about this in our own yards? This is a map of lawns in our country, and it turns out lawns are our biggest irrigated crop in the United States. So we have 50 million acres of lawn. And you can see that in Connecticut, we're looking quite green up there. We are definitely part of the problem on the lawn culture. But what we can do is we can start to rethink our lawn, add native plants that the butterflies and the birds and other wildlife need, and we can avoid pesticides. So I'm going to talk about the lawn culture and pesticides mostly, and not as much about adding native plants today. That can be another talk that you guys can invite me back for. But why is lawn culture such a problem? I mean, lawns, obviously, from that picture we were looking at before, they offer very little habitat. There's not much flowering plants. There's not much food. There's not much shelter. But also because turf grass is not native to our area or to the United States, most turf grasses, they take a lot of care. They take a lot of water. They take a lot of fertilizer, and we put all those things on. So 90 million pounds of pesticides a year in the United States are put onto lawns. And all of that eventually washes, or most of that eventually washes into our wetlands, rivers, and oceans. And the other thing about turf grass, that I love this picture because it shows the deep root systems of the various native perennial plants. And as water, say you have rainwater washing off your roof shingles, which are made of fossil fuel, um, uh, involves oils and stuff from what they're made of, which is fossil fuels. So that's washing down probably onto your driveway, which is also made of petroleum products, and picking up more kind of toxins and oils and stuff, and then washing onto turf grass. So if you have a garden of things like these pale coneflower and Indian grass growing, the plants and the root systems will catch that runoff, and it'll soak down into the water and be filtered by this root system. But for turf grass, you can see here on the left, there's just like no root system. I was watching some neighbors, or a new house in our neighborhood, and they were rolling out turf, in these big rolls. And I was thinking, oh yeah, that's because they had there's no root system to it. But so that means that it's not good at filtering stormwater. And when the roots are that shallow, they need a lot of water because they don't have reserves of their deep roots to reach down and get water. So we end up using 9 billion gallons of water a day, according to the EPA, on lawns. So these are just some of the problems. So rethinking your lawn, what can that involve? Mowing less frequently, every 2 to 3 weeks, reducing the size by adding trees, a little meadow, or shrubs. I always say native shrubs are the lowest maintenance thing that you can do to your yard to reduce lawn. And also always say test your soil to see if there is any fertilizer needed, because chemical fertilizers are also a problem for water quality, and avoid pesticides. And if you are wanting to be on the pollinator pathway, or just to attract butterflies and birds to your yard, if you do plant those native plants that will draw them, you definitely don't want to spray pesticides, because then you're creating kind of an ecological trap. So this is in my neighborhood. I was riding my bike by here one June day, and I saw so many bumblebees on this catmint, and they had just that day put this yellow sign showing that it had been sprayed. This is next door to me, this guy. So I just, it's almost better not to plant something like that that's going to attract so many bumblebees if you're going to then spray with pesticides. Avoid ground soaking. So a lot of pesticides that they'll say to do a soak around a tree, for example, to treat it. And the problem with that is 70% of our native bees are ground nesters. There's a little cellophane bee here. Those guys are coming up now, so you might be seeing cellophane bees. And then the 30% of the native bees are cavity nesters. So they're laying their eggs in like your hydrangea stalks or your old milkweed stalks. So one thing we can do is wait in the spring to clean up. It hasn't been too tempting to clean up around here lately because it's been so rainy and freezing, but it really is important. Most of the pollinators are overwintering in the leaf matter and in those old stalks. So waiting until evening temperatures are sort of reliably in the 50s, or the ground is 56 degrees, is a safe time to start that cleanup. And then to talk about pesticides a little bit more, I've become really interested in how we can move Connecticut policy towards protecting human health and wildlife from pesticides. So I'm going to go into that a little bit here, and I hope it's not too much of a downer, but we do use a lot of pesticides, and it's important to know what they are. So what are they? They are insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, anything that we've created to kill something that we don't want, like crabgrass or ticks or grubs, and 88 million households use them. Herbicides are the biggest category. And they are also really a part of climate change. They're made from oil and gas products, most of them, including neonicotinoids, which I'm going to talk about more, pyrethroids, glyphosate formulas, that's Roundup. So a lot of people don't know that, but they are coming out of the oil and gas industry. And a lot of them were created as weapons during World War II. So they were created, these poisons, to use as weapons. And then after the war, the chemical industry looked around and they were like, well, what can we do with all this poison that we have? And one of the first things they did was target clover, which until the 1950s, if you bought grass seed, it might have clover seed in it. But after that, we became this nation that was like, we have to have just a monoculture of green grass, like no little violets or clover can be in there. This picture on the right, a friend who was at the Vatican took and brought it back to us at the Pollinator Pathway, because that lawn is almost completely clover, and I think it's very beautiful. But so that's sort of the background of what they are. And I think for the most part, most of us feel like, well, if they're selling it on the shelves, it must be safe, right? It must be fine. But the problem with that is that pesticides are primarily tested by the manufacturers themselves. The tests are done only on the active ingredient, so not on the complete formula. And they are done on a limited population. For example, children are not involved, and people with existing health issues. So we don't know how they affect children versus adults. There's no testing to determine the effects of combinations of pesticides. So say you spray your lawn for ticks, and then you also do other treatments for grubs or something. We don't know what those combinations, how they are affecting human health, wildlife. And lastly, in the United States, we still use a lot of pesticides that have been banned in other countries, including neonics, which I'm going to talk about more. So what we can do, though, is empower ourselves. It's pretty easy to learn the basics of what might be going on in your yard. If you use a lawn company, or if you're really frustrated with a pest and you go in to buy something, look at the label, or ask your lawn company, take a picture of the label of whatever they're using, and look for the active ingredient. Some are less harmful, and some are like super killers of pollinators and birds. So it's important to look them up. A couple of you can do your homework pretty easily. Pesticide Action Network has this. I took a screenshot of this page they have, where you just type in the name of the chemical that you see on that label, and it'll give you all kinds of information about how it affects wildlife and human health. Beyond Pesticides is great. Xerxes Society has a lot of information, and so does pollinatorpathway.org. One of the things that both Xerxes and Pollinator Pathway have done is put up information about how some organic pesticides are actually harmful to pollinators. So you can't just think, oh, it's made from chrysanthemums, so it must be okay, because that's not always the case. So just have to do a little bit of homework. And then I was going to talk about 3 specific pesticides. One is this weed and feed, which is just particularly bad. 2,4-D is the active ingredient, and it's 2,4-D is literally half of it. They used half of what is in 2,4-D as a part of making Agent Orange. So this is very serious stuff. It's very harmful to human health, dangerous to children. Dogs have been shown to develop lymphoma from it. It's harmful to birds and pollinators. It's with the U.S. Geological Survey that tests for pesticides in water. It's really expensive to test water for pesticides, so we don't have a lot of data, but luckily the USGS does do some of that testing, and they've found 2,4-D is the #1 herbicide detected in streams and shallow ground throughout the country. And that's from home and garden use. One of the problems is that Scots or whoever else, I don't know if it's just Scots, decided they would mix the fertilizer that you're supposed to put all over your whole lawn with the pesticide, with the insecticide, so, or the herbicide, sorry. So what you're doing is you're no longer using the pesticide right where the problem is. You're spreading it all over the yard. So it's definitely an overuse. There's no, it throws out the window the idea of integrated pest management, which is to just use the least toxic thing you can on the problem to assess and know that you have a problem and then treat that problem. So I just put that out there because I see those bags being sold at Lowe's by the zillions, and it's just not the best way to do things. And then the other two pesticides I'm going to talk about are just like used in such huge quantities that they're important to know about. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, and that is the most widely used herbicide in the United States. It's used on more than 250 million pounds of it are used on American crops, but it's also used on the side of the Merit. When you see that they've sprayed along the Merit, that's what that is. And people use it in their yards. It's been in the news a lot because there have been connections to human cancer. In 2017, there was a California study that connected it without doubt to human cancer. You probably already know all this, but Bayer is the company that makes it, and they went into a $10 billion settlement. They announced that they were going to withdraw Roundup from the shelves by 2023, meaning you would no longer be able to just go into the store and buy it, but it is still there. So I'm not sure if it's still slated to come off the shelves, but even if it does, it'll be like some other pesticides like the neonicotinoids that even though you can't buy them in Lowe's, if you hire a lawn care company, they will still be able to use them. So it doesn't really take them out of the environment anyway. It's really disturbing how widespread glyphosate is. It was found in 80% of people's urine tested in one study. So they're just like horrifying news headlines like that. It is also, in addition to causing cancer in humans, it has this antibacterial property. So it kills soil microbes. So it's destroying the integrity of our soil. It binds to essential minerals that plants need, so they can't be taken up into the plant. And it very commonly shows up in water and even in marine environments. But the main problem, the main devastation to pollinators from glyphosate was the development of glyphosate resistant corn and soybeans for the most part, so that you can just plant those crops and then you can spray glyphosate across the entire field, and it won't kill the corn and soybean, but it will kill everything else. And that's where we lost in the Midwest so many of the wildflowers that were sustaining our migrating monarchs, for example, and just other pollinators. So lots of different problems with this. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting, one of the things it does to bumblebees is that it interferes with their thermoregulation. So bumblebees, when they're down in their, they are ground nesters, and they lay the eggs underground. And when they're down there, if it's too hot, they can use their wings to bring cooler air in and make things cooler. And if it's too cold, they have this way of like shivering their bodies, and it creates warmth. So they're able to really control a little bit the temperature, and they can't do that when they have been exposed to glyphosate. So third bad news story is neonicotinoids. And this is something that Victor and I have been working on so much for 3 years in Connecticut, trying to pass legislation, trying to get the state to pass legislation to restrict these pesticides. So they are called neonicotinoids. They work like nicotine, so it's like new nicotine. When they were introduced, they were known to be super deadly to insects, but thought to be safe for people. And we are finding out more and more that they're not so safe for people. They're known as the new DDT because they are having such serious effects on pollinators and birds and whole ecosystems. They've been linked really a lot in the news, and you might be aware of this, but they've been linked to serious declines in bees and other insect populations. So the insect apocalypse that the New York Times was talking about, that has all coincided with the introduction of this pesticide in the 1990s to now. The loss of 3 billion birds is connected to neonics. The EPA was actually sued, and in response to the suit, they did a study of how neonics were affecting threatened and listed endangered species. And their study showed that over 200 threatened and endangered species were being pushed toward extinction by this one pesticide. So, or one group of pesticides, I should say. And then we're seeing that they are affecting deer, and they're all ending up like everything else in our water. So the USGS found that 50% of our US rivers and streams contain neonics. And we know that in Connecticut, they're in our rivers, which I'm going to touch on again. But where we use them largely in Connecticut is on lawns and golf courses. So in our backyards and on golf courses and office park campuses and that kind of thing. And then also in agriculture on coated seeds. We have in Connecticut a huge number of golf courses. We have 15 to 30,000 acres of golf course. So that is a lot of land to be absorbing a lot of these pesticides. And then we also, though we aren't a huge agricultural state, we do plant 800 million corn seeds a year. And most of those in Connecticut are coated with neonics, except for the organic ones. The problem with the seeds is kind of alarming. A lot of our food comes from seeds that are coated. They're required to make them these bright colors when they have pesticides on them. These are systemic pesticides, so they go up into the plant. They become part of the plant as it grows. So a plant that it has been treated with neonics, the dew on its leaf and leaves and the pollen, they will contain the pesticide and be toxic to insects. So it makes the whole plant poison. And as a result, so some of that pesticide can be in our food if you're eating food that is grown with these pesticides. But the seed coatings, there's a loophole in our government regulation of pesticides that says if a pesticide is on a seed, even if it's a registered pesticide, if it's on a seed, it's not considered a pesticide. So it's not regulated, it's not counted even. The Connecticut Department of Agriculture told us they did not know how many coated seeds are being used in Connecticut. So the other problem with them is that only 5% of the pesticide coating actually is taken up into the plant, and the other 95% moves through the soil and air in the form of dust into waterways. That's from a study that the industry did themselves. So we really, and again, using the coated seeds, this is not treating a pest that we know is present. This is a prophylactic. So there may be a pest. So it's putting a lot of unnecessary pesticide into the environment. So we know in Connecticut that our rivers do contain imidacloprid, which is a neonic. And so the USGS, I have all these numbers up here. I've gotten really interested in it. But the USGS tested 16 rivers in Connecticut, and 9 had levels of imidacloprid that are lethal to aquatic life. So everything that lives in the river. And I work closely on the Norwalk River, which is one of 2 rivers that the USGS monitors long term. So they've been testing for this neonic in the Norwalk River since 2013. And they've been testing for 218 pesticides. And of those 218, 30 were found in the Norwalk River, and 1 of them is at levels that are lethal to aquatic life. So this is just really upsetting. We need to do something about it. So neonics have been associated with declines in zooplankton. There's studies that show that when it's present in marine waters and in fresh water, you see declines in the larvae of crustaceans, crabs, and fish. And then if you look in Norwalk Harbor, from 1990 to 1990 to today, you'll see that all of these different colors on these spikes are different species of crab that we've had in Norwalk Harbor. And as you go from the 1990s to today, you see we're down to only about 4 colors from this whole list that was originally up here. So we're losing population and we're also losing diversity. We don't have data connecting this to neonics, but we feel like it is likely a cause and a problem for us in Norwalk Harbor, and the reason we're seeing declines in biodiversity there. This is just another example. Like, I'm just throwing out what we know about pesticides in water locally. This was dredging that was done 2 years ago in Darien. Dredging that's done, I think, every 10 years, where they dock boats at Pear Tree Point, and they are used to getting rid of the dredge, the muck and the mud that they pull up from the bottom of the harbor, by taking it to these open pits in the ocean for disposal. But 2 years ago, they were not able to because the levels of pesticides were so high in that dredge. And they don't even test for the pesticides. They don't test for neonics and some of the newer pesticides. They're still finding DDT and chlordane and things that we banned 30 years ago, building up in the bottom of our waterways. So the idea that we can just put these things out and they just go away after killing the bug or the plant that we want them to is just not the case. They end up in our water. So does it matter to us, to humans, if neonics are in our water? The CDC has done a study that shows half of us are exposed to neonics regularly. Some of that is through food. 63% of our food samples had neonics in them. Some is through drinking water. They have been shown so they're like nicotine. They work through our neurological system, and they've been shown to especially be harmful to developing children. So harms to heart and brain development in prenatally exposed children. So it's all pretty depressing. In the University of Illinois, there was a study of pregnant women that showed that 95% of them had neonics in their bodies. So this is not safe for us. The EPA continues to not do anything about it. Neonic pesticides are under review, and we continue to not hear anything year after year about any changes or any restrictions that might come out of that review. But states are taking action. So New Jersey has banned them for non-agricultural use. Maine has, Nevada has. The European Union and parts of Canada banned them years and years ago. And New York just passed a really important bill banning both those coated seeds and non-agricultural uses, so uses on lawns and golf courses. We haven't had luck in Connecticut. We've been working for 3 years to try to pass a non-agricultural ban on neonics. But Connecticut has always been a leader on pesticide legislation. We were the first state to ban pesticides from playing fields, kindergarten through 8th grade in 2010. We led the way in 2016 with the Pollinator Protection Act, which made neonics not be available at Lowe's on the shelf. You had to be a licensed applicator to use them. In 2022, we banned chlorpyrifos from golf courses. Chlorpyrifos is a horrible organophosphate that causes harm to developing children and all kinds of million lists of horrible things. We found out through going in and doing research that it's mainly used on golf courses in Connecticut. 80% of the use was on golf courses. So we had a bill that banned chlorpyrifos from golf courses and neonics for non-agricultural uses, but in the end, they lopped the neonics off and only passed the chlorpyrifos part of the ban. But 2 groups have come out of this recent legislation. At the government level, there's a pollinator advisory committee at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. And then citizens have gotten together, and organizations like the Pollinator Pathway and Connecticut Audubon Society and others, to create the Connecticut Pesticide Reform, CPR. So we are working on this issue in Connecticut, and if anyone wants to join, you can email me and I will bring you into our meetings. And so how does regulation work and not work? This might be more than anybody's interested in, but as I've been working on this just as somebody who's worried about clean water and, bugs, and I've been kind of surprised how difficult it is. This is a picture of our colleague from CPR who actually went to the basement of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She got a Freedom of Information Act request to see the pesticide registrations. So when people want to use a pesticide, they have to fill out one of these forms and pay a fee. And then in Connecticut, we don't digitize this. So no one has access to like how much is being used and where. Other states like New Jersey, for example, you can just go online and you can check these numbers. But for us, we had to go sit in the basement and look page by page. Our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection does not have the pesticide department properly funded or staffed. So you can see this headline from the Hartford Courant that hundreds of pesticide complaints come in and very few are investigated. And I think that's because the whole thing is underfunded. But in the meantime, up to $3 million comes in per year in terms of what people pay to fill out these requests to use the pesticides. So one of the things we advocate for is that money should go towards compliance and enforcement of the laws that we already have. So these are just some of my gripes about how we do things in Connecticut. But what we hope for is we hope to follow in New York's footsteps and to ban the use of neonics on lawns and ornamental landscaping and on treated seed. And I really thank Earthplace for inviting me to give this kind of bummer of a talk in a way, because there's so much bad news involved. But what we really need to do in Connecticut is get the word out that, why are we doing this? We're using so much of these sorts of really toxic substances so that we can have super green lawns. And then we're not really looking at the cost of, what's happening to our butterflies and bees and children and dogs and drinking water. And it's just really time to raise awareness. So I hope everyone who listens to this will just go out and, I don't know, talk about it, to try to help raise awareness about the harms. But there is some good news. There's local action. Stamford and Norwalk have both passed ordinances banning pesticide use on city property. So that's something that we can all work on in our towns locally. And there are a lot of alternatives. There are solutions. Encouraging natural pest predators. Just by stopping using pesticides, you allow for a natural balance to return to your yard. This is a picture from my yard with this ladybug about to eat hopefully all of those aphids that were on one of my milkweeds. But that's the kind of thing when you have possums eating the insects and birds eating the insects, you don't end up with, what a lot of us have, which is just the lawn with the white-footed mouse, the deer, and the tick. So we need more of a balance and more of biodiversity than that. So I've just put some things that I've found helpful up here. Guide to creating a healthy lawn from beyond pesticides, and Deep has something good online, household alternatives. And you can also, if you're somebody that outsources your yard care, you can hire an organic lawn care company. There's Mo Green and Dan Delventhal. I'm giving a talk with him in a couple days. And there's Organic Ways and Means, Jeff Cordelac, and there's also a list that Connecticut NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farm Association, has online of accredited organic care professionals across the whole state. So grubs, I'm going to talk about the grubs, invasive plants, and ticks just really quickly, because these are huge problems that everybody faces. And if we can't use pesticides, like, what are we going to do? So the alternative for grubs, they really like wetness. So grubs are I didn't even know what they were, because I haven't worried about them in my yard. But if you have a beautiful lawn, they can cause brown spots. They're the larvae of beetles. So Japanese beetles, but also other beetles. But they like things to be wet. So if you mow high and don't water too much and aerate, that can go a long way to helping to avoid them. Milky spore is a natural treatment that you use in late summer. And then if you need to spray something, there's a bioinsecticide called Grub Gone, or Grub Be Gone, I think, that is also relatively safe. And then for invasives, this is so hard. I do a lot of this work with the Norwalk River Watershed Association, trying to take out these bully invasives like Japanese knotweed and porcelain berry, and it's really difficult. But we do a lot of hand pulling, repeated cutting, and we use tarps to cover after we cut. So you can use either vinyl tarps, or you can do cardboard layers with wood chips on top to just sort of smother out the root systems after you cut things. And then finally, if you really need something for like between the cracks in your walkway where things keep growing, you can use vinegar, salt, and a dish soap solution. And there are botanical vinegars that are super strong that you can use, but I'm actually not that familiar with how to tell people to do that. But if people are interested in more information on that, I can get that. And then for ticks, we say spray yourself instead of your yard. There are CDC studies that show spraying a yard to be ineffective at reducing disease. It does reduce the number of ticks, but it doesn't reduce the incidence of disease. So you still have to be very careful. It's not going to get rid of everything. Can't kill all ticks. So you have to just be really vigilant about checking for ticks. There's a recent study by the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. They had done a study and then they redid it, like I think this year, that showed where in a yard ticks were likely to be. And it is not the lawn, it's the 1 meter area between the edge of woods and the start of the lawn. So to know that that is the area, sometimes people will landscape that, with gravel or mulch or something to just make that separation. So out on the lawn, it's usually too hot and dry for, not today, but it's usually too hot and dry for ticks. They really need, they need things to be wet. And if taking out Japanese barberry is a huge thing. There are multiple studies showing that they harbor the white-footed mouse and they keep moisture. They create a moist environment even on hot, dry days where ticks can survive. So taking that bad invasive out is a good idea on many levels, but it will reduce the number of ticks. And then if you do want to use something, tick boxes are these little boxes you can put in the yard that have cotton in them with a pesticide on them, and the mouse will go in there and get the pesticide on him and then take it back to his nest. So it's a way of using a pesticide without broadcasting it in your yard. And then there's finally tick kills, which is new to us, but it was tested in Connecticut and found to be 92% effective, to last for several weeks, and to not harm pollinators. So I don't know that much about this. We just have had emails going around that this might be a good alternative to suggest to people. Let's see. Mosquitoes, same thing, spray yourself, not into the air. It's pretty well chronicled with studies that killing flying mosquitoes is very inefficient, does not work. The way to address mosquito problems is using dunks, mosquito dunks that you can put in standing water to kill the larvae. The Xerxes Society is a great resource. I took a picture here of their directions for dealing with mosquito problems in your yard. And this is a change we're working towards. We want to see fewer of these yellow signs and more pesticide-free signs. Payoffs are also healthier yards for our kids, more bees and butterflies, birds, and just a looser sense of what's beautiful. I just started making a list at one point of all the articles I saw in the New York Times, NPR, CNN, the Wall Street Journal on, rewilding and just kind of loosening up our sense of what it's okay for a front yard or backyard to look like. This is actually my house in the bottom corner. So I do the no mow May. We're about to have May, and I really let it grow most years, and I did this year. The idea of no mow May is that early in the spring, at the beginning of spring, the queen bumblebees come out. They have not laid their eggs yet. They're the only ones that overwinter. I mean, lots of queens are coming out, but the bumblebees I've focused on, and they need some nectar and pollen. So often in early spring, what's available are the little violets and dandelions that are in our lawns. So if we cannot cut those, it doesn't have to be like a strict no mowing anything May. Like I cut these paths through our yard and I basically go around any violets and other flowering things that we have to try to just keep some of that forage available. But I also kind of like use it as a way to see, if I were gonna get rid of some of my lawn, how would it look if I planted wildflowers here? I've experimented with how to reduce my lawn during no mow May. These are just some stops on the pollinator pathway, people that have rethought their lawns and reduced size. And this is a recap. Here's Victor. This is us in Hartford lobbying for some pesticide reform. You can reduce your lawn, avoid pesticides, read the labels, empower yourself to understand what pesticides are being used, buy organic food, put up a habitat sign, a pollinator pathway sign. And if you want to get involved, email me if you want to get involved in working on some of the legislative ideas that we are working on with CPR, Connecticut Pesticide Reform. But you can also just on your own email or call your state representative and ask them to support pesticide reform in Connecticut, targeting neonics especially. There are also problems at the federal level that we don't need to go into, but there's a great bill put forth by Cory Booker, Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act. That I think our representatives in this area, Blumenthal, Murphy, and Himes, are supportive of that bill, but that would solve so many problems. That is an amazing bill that we wouldn't need to ban neonics in Connecticut if that passed. So that's another good thing to know about and to ask for support for. And that's it. All the bad news is over.